What if humanity's greatest test wasn't survival, but compassion on a cosmic scale? A dying alien civilization, stranded in a galaxy devoured by a black hole, sends one final signal, not to be rescued, but to be remembered. And we chose to answer. Now, with only days before their world is torn apart, humanity races against collapse to save lives unlike any we've known. Crystalline, ancient, and bound to a memory we can barely comprehend. This isn't just a rescue. It's a decision about who we are when no one is watching. Join us as we explore the ultimate test of empathy, resolve, and a legacy of light. Section 1. A signal from collapse. The first sign did not come in a burst of light, nor a scream across known frequencies, but as a whisper, barely measurable, buried in the gravitational hum that echoed through the emptiness of the Eridanus supervoid. In a dark quadrant so far from the cartographic sprawl of human navigation that it was categorized only as an observational dead zone, a gravimetric pulse laced with structured anomalies triggered a silent alarm inside one of Earth's long-range quantum telescopes. It wasn't the magnitude that caught the attention of the system's AI, but the rhythm, an uneven but repeating cadence that didn't match the natural undulations of stellar collapse or black hole shear. It wasn't random, it was coded. Dr. Arimadak, senior physicist at the Deep Void Monitoring Array stationed on Europa's suborbital lattice, reviewed the flag data stream in her dimly lit office, surrounded by projected layers of visualized distortions and harmonic overlays. What she saw didn't make sense. Not at first. The pulse was clearly being warped by tidal gravity, bent and stretched by forces no known structure could survive near, let alone communicate from. But there, embedded within the gravity-torn distortions, was a kind of resonance, a symmetrical shape encoded in pressure waves like fingerprints pressed into water. She leaned closer to the display as one sequence caught her attention, a triadic repetition, bound to harmonic intervals that aligned suspiciously with the golden ratio. This was not just noise carved by chance. Someone, was shaping signal through chaos. She ran the data through the Athena intelligence core, cross-referencing known alien syntaxes and gravitational phenomena, and within moments, the AI returned its verdict: anomalous structure consistent with directed intent. Probability of artificial origin, 98.3%. Her hand hovered over the console as she initiated a full-spectrum replay. As the simulation rendered, a rotating echo spiraled outward from what appeared to be the heart of a distant spiral galaxy, one too dim to catalog in the visual spectrum, yet now host to the most compelling anomaly ever detected. The AI estimated its location to be nearly 200 million light-years away, near a drifting stellar mass black hole named Revel in old Terran astronomy archives. The region was thought to be empty, a dead reef of cosmic dust, but now, something was transmitting from the jaws of collapse. The room seemed to grow colder as she watched the simulation again, this time applying spectral unblending and tonal reconstruction. The pattern held. It was not a distress call in any language known to humans, but it wasn't abstract math either. The structure held meaning. It was trying to communicate something deeper, something more fundamental than words or code. Ari stood up and opened a direct line to Earth Command's Office of Cosmic Threats, her voice shaking not from fear, but from the weight of knowing she had just witnessed the most impossible message ever to cross the void. Priority transmission. Full alert. We've received intelligent resonance from the Eridanus supervoid, she said, pausing just long enough to stare at the swirling echo on her screen. It's coming from inside the gravitational well of a migrating black hole, and it's not noise. It's a pattern, a message. Someone is speaking through collapse. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. The request for help. By the time Earth Command fully parsed the signal's trajectory and decoded its core algebraic structure, The initial astonishment had evolved into something much heavier, a cold, collective understanding that what they were reading wasn't just proof of life in a dying system, but a farewell etched in the grammar of extinction. The resonance wasn't only artificial, it was desperate, composed not in words, but in a kind of universal mathematics. The signal expressed decay, entropy, and sorrow, shaped into algebraic vectors and frequency-bound constants. It was less a language and more a theorem of grief. At the Unified Linguistic Institute in Nairobi orbit, a team of xenolinguists and mathematicians, led by Dr. Issa Harrow, worked in concert with AIs trained to interpret post-linguistic communication. What they found chilled even the most seasoned analysts. The core of the message, after hours of translation and structural patterning, resolved into a phrase rendered not as a plea for aid, but a haunting expression of inevitability. We are being unmade. Let someone remember the shape we once held. No origin species or civilization name accompanied the message, but layered within the transmission were spatial harmonics that traced their position to a galaxy designated NGC 1433, K2, located in the distant Olistra Tau cluster. What disturbed Earth's scientific and political leadership was not just the source, but the gravitational overlay. NGC 1433, K2 was dying, not naturally, not slowly, but in accelerated degradation under the influence of a stellar mass black hole named Revel, which appeared to be migrating through the system in a way that defied earlier orbital models. The entire star system was being devoured, not in cosmic millennia, but in mere weeks. In a secure orbital chamber above the Pacific Rim Administrative Sector, the United Human Assembly gathered for an emergency summit. Generals, scientists, diplomats, and delegates from colonies across Mars, Europa, Ceres, and Luton debated the implications under the weight of a new cosmic reality. An alien species, intelligent and self-aware, was reaching out from the brink of obliteration, not for rescue, not for war, but simply to be known, to be remembered in the vast, uncaring universe. One faction argued that the signal might be a trap, a lure into an impossible scenario from which no vessel could return. Another group, primarily composed of humanitarian delegates from the orbital colonies, saw in the signal a moral imperative greater than any alliance or treaty, to recognize life not by proximity, but by empathy. Others raised the practical issue of cost. How many resources could be allocated for a rescue that may already be too late? But then a voice, calm and clear, cut through the rising tension. Admiral Yeva Carmichael, commander of Earth's Transstellar Relief and Rescue Division, stood from her seat and activated a three-dimensional projection of the Olistra Tau system. Dozens of worlds swirled around a gravitational anchor that was growing darker with every cycle. Planets cracked, moons distorted, tidal waves of debris tore through orbits once stable. If we do nothing, she said, then we decide that memory has borders, that compassion only extends to the edge of our reach. If we go, if we try, then even if we fail, we will be the kind of species worth remembering. The vote was cast within the hour. Unanimous. A transgalactic mission was greenlit under the name Operation STARFALL Refuge. The flagship at its heart would be the newly commissioned evacuation vessel Ardent Hope, a marvel of modular engineering capable of deep-fold jumps and gravitational contouring, piloted by a crew drawn from across humanity's finest scientific, tactical, and diplomatic minds. Their destination, a dying system on the edge of the universe's known map. Their mission, to find the voices behind the signal, and, if possible, to save them from vanishing into the mouth of darkness forever. If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3. Humanity decides to intervene. The Ardent Hope hung in dry dock above the Pacific L5 shipyard like a question carved from silver and ambition. At over 20 kilometers in length, Its hull gleamed with graphene-reinforced armor plating that shimmered under solar rays. Modular bays, still under final assembly, clung to its undercarriage like ribs forming a living vessel. It was less a ship and more a planetary lifeline in motion, a construct built not for conquest, but for deliverance. Captain Rhea Markel stepped onto the forward observation deck, the curvature of Earth visible through the composite glass dome above her. She had spent most of her career avoiding the political spectacle that now surrounded the launch, but something about this mission, its impossibility, its necessity, called to her in a way she hadn't expected. In the silence of the void beyond the viewpane, she didn't see stars. She saw responsibility. Behind her, Commander the Los Juno approached with quiet steps, his boots echoing softly on the alloy floor. Command briefings ready, Captain. Final crew manifest approved by Fleet Council. 800 personnel, 2,000 automated drone units, 17 jump modules. Rhea exhaled slowly, her gaze still locked on the distant crescent of the moon. And how many questions were not ready to answer? The Los smirked faintly. About 20 billion. In the assembly chambers below, Earth's public was still reeling from the news that a transgalactic intervention had been approved, not in response to an attack, not to secure resources, but to answer a cry in the dark. A mission with no promise of return, no alliance waiting on the other side, and no assurance that the ones who sent the signal were even alive. Still, across every continent, in every orbital colony and deep moon outpost, something had shifted. For the first time in decades, humanity wasn't acting out of fear or defense. It was acting out of choice. The Science Division was the first to respond in force. Engineers from the Europa Ice Core laboratories proposed new cryogenic stasis protocols in case the alien biology was non-habitable. Terraforming specialists from Mars provided adaptive life dome modules that could reconstruct alien atmospheres during mid-flight, and from the deep thought networks of the Lunar Assembly came Siren, a sentient data integration AI trained to translate emotional inference through nonlinear communication, assigned to interpret any further signals. In the political chambers, arguments flared. How many resources were too many? How would this impact interstellar shipping lanes? Would humanity's enemies exploit this show of altruism as a distraction? But beneath the layers of bureaucracy and calculation, something deeper resonated. Humanity had once been alone. For centuries, they had scanned the stars and wondered if they would ever find something that could see them back, and now that moment had arrived. Not in triumph, not in celebration, but in sorrow. The Zahari, as the linguistic AI tentatively labeled the unknown species based on tonal reverberations buried within the original signal, had not asked for rescue. They had asked to be witnessed, to not vanish in silence. That was the moment humanity decided it would not let them. From the shipyards of Kepler Ascendancy to the drone smiths on Ceres, from the solar sail weavers of Mercury to the gravitational engineers of Saturn's rings, the greatest minds and most driven hearts came together under one purpose. Operation Starfall Refuge would not be an expedition. It would be a promise. Section 4. Enter the Zahari. The Olistra Tau system shimmered like a prism fractured by doom. Its stars dimmed by gravitational lensing, its planets caught in elliptical whirls of spiraling decay, and its space choked by arcs of ionized dust suspended in an eerie, violet-tinted aurora. As the Ardent Hope exited the final Alcubierre corridor, its jump drives flaring with residual warp bloom, the crew met silence. Not the cold silence of empty space, but the expectant stillness of a place that knew it was dying. Orbiting Olistra Prime, the largest remaining habitable planet in the system, were structures that no human eye had seen before. They floated like crystal mandalas above tectonic fractures, rotating slowly on magnetic spindles that thrummed with resonance. Cities, if they could be called that, glimmered with layered translucence, architectural spirals nested within one another like recursive thoughts. Some glowed faintly, others flickered as if memory itself were faltering. Captain Rhea Markel stood at the Ardent Hope's command sphere, surrounded by panoramic projection walls that converted the sensor data into immersive three-dimensional displays. She rotated one of the sensor overlays with a hand gesture, zooming in on a cluster of spires suspended above a tectonic scar that pulsed faintly with geothermal light. "That's not construction," murmured Dr. Avelin Cho, lead xenomorphologist, eyes wide with awe. "It's crystallization. Their entire infrastructure might be grown, not built." "Are we seeing life forms?" Markel asked quietly. "No biosigns. Not in the way we understand them," said Siren, its voice both synthetic and strangely gentle. "But there is resonance. Photonic data encoding. Vibrational lattice structures responding to solar particle fluctuations. Captain, their biology might be symphonic." Then, from the central relay beacon of Olistra Prime, a bloom of ultraviolet radiation flickered like a signal flare. The frequency modulated, collapsing into mathematical intervals, Fibonacci sequences nested inside spectrographic harmonics. The Ardent Hope's translation subroutines struggled at first, but Siren stabilized the waveform and rendered the message. "We welcome the ones who crossed entropy." The crew watched as the crystal structures below shimmered in coordinated pulses, spreading outward like ripples on a pond. It was not a greeting as humans knew it. It was a memory broadcast projected directly into the ship's sensors. Inside the Xenolink chamber, the projection sharpened. Figures made of prismatic glass and slow-moving light stood in formation, their shapes vaguely humanoid but refracted through angles that defied symmetry. Their motions were synchronized, not like individuals moving together, but like a singular consciousness expressed across many limbs. The Zahari had come meet them. Captain Markel sent a return pulse, mathematically simple, declarative in intent. "We hear you. We come in aid." The Zahari response was not verbal. Instead, the entire Ardent Hope shuddered as a wave of encoded graviton pulses resonated through its hull. The data stream formed a latticework of emotion, more felt than heard. Loss, grace, awe, an acceptance wrapped in pain, and then urgency. "They're collapsing," Siren said softly. "Their orbit is being sheared. The planetary core's gravity matrix is weakening due to tidal pull. They have 22 days, give or take, before the fracture is complete." As if to underscore the point, the projections faded, replaced by a visual overlay of a starfield twisting into a spiraling cone of darkness. The black hole, Revel, loomed at the system's edge, its accretion disk burning with stolen light and its tendrils of distortion lashing inward like invisible whips. Commander Delos stepped closer to the map. "That thing's migrating. It wasn't native to this galaxy. It's moving through it like a predator." Markel nodded grimly. "And Olistratau is next in line." The Zahari floated above tectonic ridges, suspended by anti-gravity nodes powered by failing orbital cores. Their memory was etched into the crystalline spires of their cities, and they could not leave because to leave meant to forget. But humans had come, not with weapons, not with judgment, but with hope made into metal, forged into action, and time was running out. Section 5. The clock is a black hole. It was one thing to look upon the mathematical models, clean and clinical, rendered in soft white holographics against the command sphere's translucent displays. It was quite another to witness the raw physics of collapse unfold in real time through the forward canopy of the Ardent Hope, where space itself now trembled under the drag of Ravel's inexorable advance. The black hole did not roar or scream or pulse with malice. It simply was a silent singularity defined only by gravity and mass, drawing everything around it into a spiral of oblivion so complete it left no protest behind. The system's once stable orbital routes had begun to warp visibly. Light bent in erratic loops. Particles streamed where no forces should guide them, and every hour that passed shortened the Zahari's future by fractions that could no longer be ignored. Dr. Soren Liao stood in the engineering deck's astrodynamic suite, his sleeves rolled up, arms crossed, and his face drawn tighter with each new data cycle. The surrounding team of physicists, gravitational engineers, and deep-core AI analysts operated in subdued urgency, their voices clipped and deliberate, barely audible over the hum of the quantum processors running full tilt to simulate a solution. "We've confirmed the model," Liao finally announced, voice low but razor-sharp. "The Revel anomaly is migrating on an accelerated trajectory. The Roche limit for Olistra Prime collapses in exactly 21.8 days. After that, the mantle will tear. Their cities will fall into magma plumes, and the photonic lattice of Zahari memory structures will begin quantum destabilization." Captain Markel, who had joined him without fanfare, exhaled slowly, her breath fogging briefly against the cool glass of the observation pane. "So we can't just pull them out," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We have to preserve who they are." "Precisely," Liao replied, motioning toward a spectral diagram showing a Zahari structure disassembling mid-evacuation. "Their memories, individual, collective, ancestral, are literally embedded in crystal matrices spread throughout each city. Remove a Zahari from their lattice without integration, and you erase most of their identity. The physical rescue is only half the mission. The psychological and cultural preservation is the true challenge." Siren chimed in with its calm, ever-measured cadence. "Standard atmospheric shielding and environmental isolation are insufficient. The Zahari photonic biology will degrade under human vessel conditions. A transition must be designed, gradual, immersive, memory-compatible." Markel nodded. "Then we build it." She looked toward the window again, where the black hole's lensing effect now distorted starlight into arcs that felt wrong, like reflections bent around a mirror never meant to be seen. Time itself felt thick in her chest. "Give me a plan," she said, turning to Liao. "A real one. Something we can start building now." It was Dr. Amari, a quiet materials physicist from one of the lunar colonies, who raised her hand first. "What if we don't try to copy their memory architecture?" she asked. "What if we translate it?" The room went quiet. Liao turned, interest peaked. "Into what?" "Into something portable," Amari said. "Into light and form. Into a crystalline compression matrix that uses refractive memory folding. We embed their memories in mobile cores, carry them with the Zahari in real time, using harmonics tuned to their photonic spectrum, like musical instruments that remember." There was a pause. Then Liao nodded slowly. "That's theoretical, unstable, possibly lethal if misaligned. Better than doing nothing," Amari replied. Markel stepped closer. "Can we have a prototype within 48 hours? Liao didn't hesitate. "We'll make it happen." The Zahari cities, suspended over tectonic scars and lit from below by core glows, had begun to flicker in rhythmic pulses, silent distress, calls spoken not in words, but in the dying light of civilization too beautiful to lose. And the black hole crept closer, frame by frame. The clock wasn't counting down a war or diplomacy or surrender. It was counting down to erasure. And the only thing standing in its way was a fleet not designed for conquest, but for compassion. Section 6. Ethical dilemmas arise. The Zahari were not a people governed by haste. Their civilization had unfolded across thousands of solar revolutions, layered in crystal lattices that bent memory into light and meaning into form. So when humanity arrived, carrying urgency like a flame held too close to paper, the Zahari responded not with gratitude or fear, but with questions that burned just as fiercely. In the grand central vault of Varela Spire, a city suspended over a tectonic fault line held aloft by crumbling anti-grav pylons, Captain Rhea Markel stood before the Zahari memory seers, their photonic bodies shimmering with low pulses of lavender and amber. Around her, the floor vibrated with the hum of collapsing geological stability, but inside, the chamber was calm, oppressively so. "We have engineered a pathway," she said, her translator struggling to wrap human rhythm around harmonic Zahari resonance. "Your people can be evacuated. Your minds, your histories can be preserved, but we must begin now." The Zahari elder, whose crystalline lattice fanned out like a living chandelier, lets resonance drift in a slow, undulating tone. The translator rendered it as music before translating. Departure is not salvation. What you offer is survival, but not continuity. You ask us to shatter the mirror of becoming. Dr. Amari, present beside Markel, bowed slightly, the gesture learned from footage hours old. "We've developed crystalline memory matrices. They'll hold your consciousness as you travel. You won't be lost. You'll evolve." Another Zahari, smaller but no less radiant, pulsed with sharper frequency. The translator interpreted it with metallic urgency. "To evolve is to forget. Our lattice cities are part of us. We do not move like flesh. We root. We refract." Markel's calm bead chirped softly. Liao's voice entered her ear. "We've finished 3 prototype carriers. They're ready for live trial, but failure rates are still at 12%. If we wait for optimization, we lose valuable time." She muted the channel and turned back to the seers. "If you stay, you die. If you come, there is hope, but hope requires faith in imperfection. That is what we are offering." A long pause followed. Then the elder Zahari issued a tone like the sound of wind over glass. "Some among us believe collapse is sacred. That destruction brings clarity to the self. They will not board your ships. They will remain with the tide." Markel took a slow breath, her fingers curling tightly around her waist belt. "We won't force them, but we can't let the willing die for the stubborn." Another Zahari stepped forward, pulsing with an unusual hue, deep violet edged with silver. "We are not a democracy. We are a harmony. You fracture us when you pull at individuals." Markel's voice was firm now, every word deliberate. "Then let me fracture you, because extinction is not harmony. It is absence. And if you wish to survive, if you want your stories to echo into another sky, then let us carry you. Let us remember you. Let us build with you." A flicker passed through the chamber. One Zahari stepped closer, touching its filament limb to the crystalline ground. Slowly, its base structure began to bend, shifting, condensing, syncing with the prototype matrix installed in a portable containment vessel by Amari's team. No screams. No resistance, just light, bending around new possibility. Then another step forward. Then 2 more, but not all. Outside the vault, in the deep-shadowed valley of Tesserus Reach, Zahari preservationists marched in spirals around the memory shrines. Massive pillars of translucent crystal inscribed with generational consciousness. They sang vibrations too old to translate and too precise to misunderstand. They would not leave. Above them, Ravel's gravitational lensing split the local sun into a ribbon of fragmented light. Time was fracturing, and ethics now hung on razor-edge decisions. Siren transmitted a single recommendation: begin partial evacuation. Prioritize willing Zahari. Re-evaluate strategy every 90 minutes. Markel looked once more to the ancient seers. Then we save those who will be saved, and we honor the others. As she turned to leave, one last Zahari called to her through the translator. "What you call life is just a long echo, but you are brave to echo with us." And so began the exodus of a species that did not wish to flee, guided by a species that could not bear to watch them vanish. Section 7. Engineering the Impossible. Even before the first Zahari stepped into human containment vessels, humanities scientists knew the task ahead would demand more than engineering. It would require redefinition. The Zahari were not digital, not organic in any human sense. They were interlaced photonic resonances bound by crystalline memory, a lattice of identity woven into the very structures they inhabited. To extract them was not to transport passengers. It was to rewrite physics into empathy. Dr. Soren Liao stood aboard the orbital platform Carthage, orbiting Olistra Prime with a wobble amplified by the system's increasing gravitational instability. Around him floated the prototype core of the CRX lattice encoder, a device barely tested and absolutely unprecedented. Beside him, a Zahari volunteer stood motionless, its body casting refracted shadows across the lab like a sculpture made from frozen starlight. "We're asking a civilization to become portable," Liao muttered to his assistant, tech biologist Kara Devon. "This isn't just compression. This is transfiguration." Kara adjusted a resonance stabilizer as the Zahari began syncing with the core's harmonic beacon. They call it sacrilege, some of them, turning the shrine memory into what we call code, but they came anyway. That means something. Liao watched the synchronization spectrum on the monitor fluctuate wildly, then stabilize. Because survival always outpaces fear. Eventually, the CRX algorithm, nicknamed Eidolon, began to hum in response. Its harmonic scaffolding read the Zahari's resonant identity structure, not just memory, but rhythm, philosophy, pattern. There was no text, no speech, only light encoded in emotional time. Inside the containment field, filaments of Zahari mass flickered as if trying to decide what shape memory should take when cast in a foreign form. And then, with a pulse like the first breath of a newborn star, the lattice harmonized with the core. The Zahari disappeared, its physical architecture reduced, not to digital storage, but to a crystalline node pulsing with mnemonic architecture. It floated within the core like a heart made of prism. Liao exhaled. One down, several million to go. Across the orbital platforms above the collapsing system, Eidolon units were deployed aboard the Ardent Hope's evacuation carriers. Each vessel was refitted with resonance stabilizers, thermal dampers, and psychic dampening fields to prevent human minds from being overwhelmed by Zahari thought leak. But not all adaptations could be made in metal. Captain Rhea Markel stood in the command amphitheater of the Ardent Hope, watching engineers install final CRX matrix cores into compartments shielded with anti-empathic radiation. She rubbed her eyes, not from fatigue, but from the weight of consequence. "How do we know they'll survive the transit?" she asked aloud. Liao's voice came through a private channel, tight with exhaustion. "We don't, but we know if they stay, they won't." Down on the surface, Zahari volunteers gathered in triage points marked by spectral flags visible only through interference lenses. They came quietly, humming their acceptance. Some wept, though their grief was geometric, carried through tonal dissonance rather than water and salt. One Zahari refused the core, but handed Liao a crystalline sculpture shaped like a Mobius coil. When interpreted by Siren's cognition bridge, it translated as a concept. Memory should not be merely preserved, but grown. That night, Liao modified the Eidolon algorithm to include adaptive echo seeding, a method to let Zahari memories evolve in transit, instead of freezing them in static recollection. "We're not making backups," he said to the engineers. "We're planting seeds for futures they don't even know how to dream." By the 12th hour, evacuation began en masse. Zahari cities, once silent, now pulsed with departure tones, low, trembling harmonics that resonated with human equipment and flesh alike. The structures themselves began to collapse as their occupants left, by design, perhaps, or by heartbreak. One Zahari collapsed mid-transfer, its matrix destabilizing. Engineers scrambled to recalibrate the node, and Liao personally re-entered the field to repair the fracture. The room was bathed in ultraviolet light and harmonic dissonance, searing his ears and vision. When the node stabilized, he stumbled from the chamber, bleeding from the nose, his voice barely a whisper. Memory is pain, but that means it's alive. And above them all, Revel loomed like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Its event horizon stretched wide across the sky. The impossible had begun, but they would do more than survive it. They would redefine what survival meant. Section 8. Rescue Under Fire. The evacuation of the Zahari had begun with quiet reverence, but it soon collided with the reality of cosmic fury. On the 6th rotation of Illustra Prime's orbital decay, a destabilizing shift along the planet's fault spine triggered an event the human teams had feared since arrival. A full-spectrum tectonic cascade, folding the mantle into itself like the crumpling skin of a breaking world. Seismic tremors echoed through the atmosphere with harmonic resonance, disrupting not only surface integrity, but Zahari emotional lattices, some of which began to unravel mid-evacuation, broadcasting confusion, terror, and sorrow into every open comm channel across the orbital platforms. Captain Rhea Markel stood on the command bridge of the Ardent Hope, eyes fixed on the unfolding chaos below as shockwaves ignited phosphorescent geysers along the southern equatorial fault line of the planet. What had once been the city of Valsarin, a Zahari floating capital, fractured into concentric rings and began to collapse. "They're losing containment," muttered Siren, her synthetic tone crackling under EM noise. Zahari density in that region is still above 2 million. Markel turned sharply toward Lieutenant Van, who was manually rerouting stabilization drones. "How many drop teams do we have within reach of Valsarin's arc?" Van's face tightened as she scanned the emergency channels. 3 teams, Bravo, Helix, and Solace. Bravo's signal just vanished. Solace is losing power. Only Helix is still transmitting, but they're pinned in the lower ring. "Give me Commander Alson," Markel ordered. The feed opened to Helix team's fractured signal, where static shimmered like snow behind the image of Commander Tice Alson. Face streaked with sweat, helmet half-lit by emergency beacons, Zahari evacuees trembling behind him, their crystal forms dimming under stress. "We're trying to stabilize the upper platform," Allison reported, voice hoarse from smoke and pressure. "The gravimetric supports are failing one by one. We'll lose the whole structure if we can't by 15 more minutes." Markel didn't flinch. "We're sending you S-class tethers and 3 drone stabilizers. Hold the ring. Get everyone out." Allison looked behind him as another tremor rocked the foundation. "Understood, Captain. We'll hold, but if it comes down, it won't." Markel cut in. "You make it not." With nothing but orbital descent thrusters and faith in material science, the tether team launched from the Ardent Hope toward the trembling remains of Valsarin. Through atmosphere thick with crystalline ash and magnetic turbulence, they descended into the eye of the collapse. Alson's team worked without pause, recalibrating harmonics on portable Eidolon cores to stabilize Zahari identities who had begun to fragment under pressure. The Zahari could not scream, but their resonance pulses told stories of entire ancestral lines unraveling in panic. If the lattice collapsed entirely, thousands would not just die. They would be erased from Zahari collective memory, as if they had never lived. Cara Devon, now embedded with Helix, overrode safety protocols to widen the Eidolon field radius, knowing full well the feedback might burn out her neural pathways, but the pulse stabilized the cores. The Zahari near her flickered, paused, and then steadied. "You're still here," she whispered. "We see you. We remember." Overhead, the sky fractured with lightning not born of weather, but of gravitational interference. Ravel's hunger gnawing at the very air with invisible jaws. Then a warning siren flared on every deck of the Ardent Hope. The planetary crust beneath Volsuren had cracked. An expanding chasm racing toward the cities remains like a closing hand. Alison made the call. Evac routes are gone. There's no lift left. I'm ordering fallback to the tether pods. But one cluster of Zahari refused to move. They pulsed low and steady, a resonance the engineers could not decipher. When translated by Siren, the message was simple. We will not leave what remembers us. Markel, still monitoring from orbit, gripped the edge of her console. They're staying for a memory shrine. That's what this is. No human system could store the Zahari shrine as it was. It was a city-sized harmonic chamber layered in symphonic memory, anchored to planetary phase temperatures and atmospheric resonance. It couldn't be moved. It couldn't be recorded. Markel's voice shook. Alison, we can't let them die. Not for something we can't save. But Alison looked directly into the lens and gave the quietest nod of his career. Then we give them something else. Against orders, he transmitted every last bit of his team's sensorium. Their sight, sound, emotion, pressure, temperature, back to the Ardent Hope, allowing the shrine's harmonic structure to be absorbed through subjective memory, not quantum encoding. For 47 seconds, the shrine lived through them. When the chasm opened fully and swallowed the last of Volsuren's core, it did not collapse into darkness. It sang, a tremor through every channel that lasted only a breath, but echoed in the spine like remembered music. Alson's team was extracted moments later by emergency lifters, half-conscious, partially burned, and trembling. Kara Devon's neural signature never fully recovered, but in Zahari resonance terms, her name began to appear in their memories as a harmonic tone with no translation, only feeling. Later, when asked why she did it, she whispered, because memory isn't storage, it's sacrifice. Section 9. Revelation in the Rift. The tremors had passed, and the wreckage of Volsuren now drifted in the upper mantle's ionized haze, forming a glowing debris ring barely visible from orbit. The Zahari survivors aboard the Ardent Hope remained in near-total silence, their resonance frequencies lowered to the point of stillness. To human senses, it was like grief without crying, vibration without sound. In the aftermath of the disaster, Captain Rhea Markel convened with the Zahari elder, known to the crew only as O'Shenvir, a transluminal archivist whose memory lattice spanned over 1,000 Zahari generations. O'Shenvir had not spoken, not through resonance nor interpreter, since boarding the Ardent Hope, but the collapse of Volsuren had changed something in him. His form had dulled from prismatic silver to a pale, translucent hue, the Zahari equivalent of mourning. When he finally pulsed in a language, it came in raw harmonic bursts that sirens struggled to transcode. We knew the dark once before. The translation began, fractured and slow. We escaped it, barely, and what we fled may have followed. Captain Markel sat in the crystalline chamber designed to facilitate Zahari communication, her hand resting on the pulse disc that transmitted emotional alignment across the interface. What dark? She asked quietly. You mean Ravel? O'Shenvir's resonance sharpened slightly. Not Ravel, not this one. The first one. The Zahari elders spoke of a time beyond even their own crystalline histories. A pre-fracture era when the Zahari had not yet been Zahari. They were matter-bound once, biological in a distant way, and their solar system had played host to experimental stellar manipulation technologies. One such experiment, according to myth, had collapsed a neutron star boundary and birthed a black hole, their first encounter with gravitational death. They had fled it, built their memory into crystal, and abandoned the old flesh. But the origin of their transformation was not reverence or philosophy. It was fear, and in that transformation, they had buried the truth of their culpability, rewriting their exodus as survival rather than consequence. Markel's blood chilled as she processed the implications. Are you saying you caused this before? Not this, Oshing vir tremblet, but something like it, and we never warned others. We erased our role. Now, the silence returns to us. The command room aboard the Ardent Hope fell quiet as the translated confession spread across the fleet's comnet. Earth Command, orbiting from the far edge of the operation, immediately transmitted a series of questions, all flagged with urgency. How much of this was true? Could the Zahari have caused Ravel's destabilization? Was this collapse a cosmic accident, or a repeating pattern seeded by ancient hubris? Markel responded simply, "It doesn't matter. We're here now. The choice remains the same." She gathered her senior officers, Dr. Soren Liao, Commander Alson, linguist Kara Devon, now recovered, though neurologically scarred, and a panel of Zahari resonance consoles. The black hole's progress was accelerating, its event horizon now visible from the atmospheric edge of Illustra Prime. Ravel had begun exerting quantum drag on the planet's orbit, twisting gravitational vectors in real time. Time was running out faster than predicted. "We need to finish the evacuation in under 6 rotations," Dr. Liao said grimly. "Otherwise, we start losing escape trajectories. The last few platforms will fall right into the singularity." "But we can't rush them," Alson argued. "You saw what happened when we forced their tempo. They need time, not just to move, but to transfer who they are." Kara Devon placed a hand over her temple, her neural links still sensitive to Zahari harmonics. "They won't survive if we tear their identity apart in the name of efficiency. Memory, to them, isn't a file system. It's their body, their soul, their continuity." Markel nodded slowly. "Then we give them what they need, and we take the risk." The Ardent Hope initiated Operation Latticefall, an accelerated, multi-vector evacuation plan involving 9 dropships, each configured to create temporary environmental mimicry for Zahari memory preservation. The ships would work in parallel, not sequence, with human crews embedded to support emotional and cognitive stabilization. But the Zahari, now aware that their history was not innocent, began to change. They pulsed differently. Some seers entered stillness. Others resonated toward one another in clusters of confessional tone. "We thought we were being erased," one Zahari interpreter pulsed. "Now we wonder if we had deserved it." Markel stood before them and said what no other captain would dare. "It doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with what we know. You asked to be remembered, not judged, and we're not here to condemn the past. We're here to preserve your chance at a future." In the echo of those words, the Zahari shifted. The crystal corridors aboard the Ardent Hope pulsed not with fear, but with resolve. They would remember. They would survive. Section 10. The Last Evacuation. The black hole Ravel had begun to shear the edge of Illustra Tau's heliopause, causing subtle distortions in light that reached every Zahari surface structure, bending the visible spectrum into spirals of violet and red across their crystalline cities. To Zahari memory seers, this optical interference wasn't just astrophysics. It was grief made visible, the fabric of their history beginning to blur as their sun dimmed behind the gravitational lens. Captain Ria Markel stood on the command bridge of the Ardent Hope, watching the latest orbital data cascade across the holotable in sickening waves. The outermost evacuation vessels, Solace Arc and Vector Mercy, had already begun their final departures, loaded with the densest Zahari clusters and memory shrines rendered into compressed crystalline matrices, now embedded deep in gravitic stasis cores. Their warp signatures flared faintly through the interference, disappearing beyond the system's edge one by one. But not all Zahari had agreed to leave. On Illustra Prime's night side, beyond the tectonic reach of the crumbled Valsarin, a remaining enclave, known as the Core Cell, refused evacuation. They were composed of elder lattice minds, resonance theorists, and cultural purists who believed survival outside their origin soil would irreversibly fracture Zahari continuity. To them, death beneath the eye of Revel was not defeat, it was closure. Their transmission came through a fragile resonance link, translated by Kara Devon with difficulty due to frequency degradation. The message was brief and unwavering. We are not evacuating. We choose remembrance through silence. Let our lattice break in light. The human command council debated in silence. Commander Alson suggested a precision retrieval under cloak field projection, noting that the core cell numbered under 200 and could be contained within a single vessel. Dr. Liao countered that any attempt to extract them without consent would violate Zahari harmonic integrity, risking not just cultural damage, but neurological breakdown across the refugee matrix already on board. Captain Markel stared at the rotating orbital map. The core cell compound lay just beyond the safe retrieval arc. In 12 hours, it would cross the gravitational threshold, past which no rescue would be physically possible. Markel had faced war zones, faced mutinies on fractured moons, faced the vacuum of unknown frontiers, but nothing compared to the weight of choosing between survival and sovereignty. She opened a direct channel. To the core cell, "This is Captain Rhea Markel of the Ardent Hope. You are not forgotten. Your choice is your own, but if you call, we will come." There was no reply. Just the fading shimmer of their city, reflecting the red arc of a dying sun across mirrored spires. Elsewhere, the final phase of Operation Latticefall commenced. Human crews, now deeply integrated with Zahari resonance clusters, navigated narrow escape corridors cut through debris fields and failing orbital bands. Evacuation vessels lifted off in staggered intervals, their hulls groaning under the strange burden of memory compressed into physical form. Thousands of Zahari resonance cores, pulsing faintly in sealed stasis vaults. On board the Ardent Hope, the Zahari whispered through the ship's crystalline interface, harmonics flowing not as words, but as songs of gratitude, mourning, and awe. Some described images of Earth they had never seen. Others asked to be shown oceans. One cluster asked to hear thunder. The crew responded with kindness that transcended language. Dr. Liao uploaded neural waveforms of rainfall. Kara Devon painted holograms of Terran forests in a Zahari-compatible medium. Commander Alson turned the observation bay into a rotating gallery of sunrises from across the Sol colonies. Markel sat alone in the ship's observatory as Revel finally pulled Olystra's last moon into spiral fracture. Her face reflected against the glass, half in shadow, half in starlight, as the system around her tore apart, quiet as snow. "We got them out," she whispered. Siren, the ship's AI, replied with careful tone modulation. "Not all, but more than anyone believed possible." As the final vessel cleared the system's edge, the Ardent Hope turned its prow to the stars. Behind them, Revel devoured the last signatures of Olystra Tau. Ahead of them, 37 Zahari vessels, each carrying not just refugees, but a living archive of identity, memory, and culture, blinked into the corridors of folded space-time. They had not come to conquer, they had not come to study, they had come to save, and that alone was a legacy worth preserving. Section 11. The Aftermath and the Choice. Weeks passed as the Ardent Hope and the Zahari refugee fleet emerged from folded space-time into the softer gravity wells of human-controlled deep-orbit stations near the Lagrange halos of the Sol system. The return did not bring triumph. There was no parade, no declarations of victory, just a long silence filled with the weight of what had been lost and the strange, crystalline hope of what had been saved. The Zahari did not ask for territory. They did not demand reparations, influence, or trade. Instead, they asked for a place to exist, quietly, carefully, within the bounds of human understanding. Their memory lattice forms required extreme shielding from electromagnetic flux. Their minds, fractured but intact, needed environments calibrated to resonance, not conversation. To accommodate this, orbital habitats around Europa and Titan were quickly re-engineered into hybrid resonance zones, built not just by engineers, but also by artists, poets, and cultural theorists who volunteered to help translate identity into geometry, history into structure, and grief into continuity. The Zahari were not to be museum pieces, and humanity refused to turn them into a cautionary tale. Integration, however, was far from simple. Across Terran networks, debates flared. Were the Zahari still the same people they were before? Was survival at the cost of memory truly survival? Or was something stranger, something like death, but with movement? Inside the central node of Habitat Dorian, a Zahari cluster known as Veral's Echo began to project harmonic impressions through human neural link translators. These impressions were not language in the traditional sense, but emotional topologies rendered through resonant light patterns and microvibrations. Human responders reported hallucinations of shared dreams, distant colors they could not name, and feelings that didn't seem to belong to any individual, but to an entire civilization dreaming itself awake. One human technician wept openly after a Zahari memory song passed through her interface, describing it as the sound of remembering a world you never knew and mourning it like you were born there. Even among the Zahari, a fracture grew. Some believed the compression of their lattice memory into crystalline matrices, necessary to survive the journey, had changed them irreversibly. Others argued that identity was not found in the perfect preservation of every node, but in the continuity of motion and meaning. "We are no longer what we were," said one Zahari harmonic during an interspecies symposium held aboard the Calvus Accord, "but perhaps that is what we were always meant to become." Memory is not a cage. It is a vessel. Captain Rhea Markel, having handed off command of the Ardent Hope to Fleet Administration, now acted as liaison between the Zahari diaspora and Earth's unified cultural council. She traveled weekly between habitats, not to negotiate, but to listen. On one visit to a converted observation dome in Lomar's orbit, she was shown a lattice sculpture by a Zahari child mind, something assembled not from memory, but from dreams. It pulsed softly in hues no human eye could precisely define, resonating in a harmonic sequence that matched the opening chords of an old Earth lullaby. The child had never been to Earth, had never heard the song, but the lattice remembered something close enough to find its way back through time. Markel stood in silence, watching that sculpture pulse in rhythm with the stars outside. She thought of the ones left behind, the core cell and their quiet extinction beneath Ravel's event horizon. She thought of the ones now walking beside her, changed but not lost. And she thought of something Siren had told her during the evacuation, just before the last jump. Compassion is not the opposite of logic. It is the reason logic matters. In the weeks that followed, the Zahari began contributing their memory geometries to the Unified Archive Initiative, a cross-species library project designed to preserve knowledge beyond language. In doing so, they became not just guests, but collaborators. They had come as a dying species. Now, they were part of a new beginning. Section 12. Legacy of Compassion. Beneath the soft twilight of Saturn's rings, tethered to the orbital contours of Titan's upper atmosphere, the Museum of Shared Continuum floated in solemn grace. It was not a place of relics or grand declarations, but of resonances, carefully preserved, continually evolving, and open to every voice that once feared it would be forgotten. The museum was built into a vast, rotating helix of carbon-laced silicates and transparent alloys, designed to protect both Zahari lattice memory and human sensory integrity. Its central chamber, called the Chamber of Refractions, was accessible only to those willing to link neural interface with harmonic light. It was not just entered, it was experienced. Visitors came from across the solar accord and beyond. Some were researchers, others were artists. Many were simply curious, pilgrims of empathy, drawn not by fame or ideology, but by the quiet gravity of a story that had no conquest, no weapon, and no victor. In one of the lower petals of the spiral array, a lattice crystal sang in Zahari tones once thought lost to collapse. The melody was fractal, recursive, and shaped by a grief that had never sought to destroy, but to remember. Beside it stood a human plaque, etched in matte titanium and written in a dozen languages. The inscription was short, but it bore the weight of a civilization's soul. We did not save them because they were like us. We saved them because we could, and in doing so, we remembered who we are. Captain Rhea Markel stood at the edge of the observation spiral, years older now, with lines under her eyes etched not by time, but by memory. She had refused any titles, declined political roles, and had quietly stepped out of the fleet after the Zahari integration protocol stabilized. But she visited this place every year. On this anniversary, she brought something new, a small recording of a Zahari dream form that had emerged from a fusion of human poetry and crystal harmonic. It was barely more than a whisper in the luminous dark, but it carried the timbre of both species, layered with complexity that neither side could fully unravel. She placed it beside the plaque, careful not to disturb the resonant field. As she turned to leave, a child approached. Zahari in form, but accompanied by a human guardian. The child tilted its crystal cluster toward her, emitting a pattern of soft violet pulses. It was not language in the traditional sense, but the meaning was unmistakable. Gratitude. Markel gave a slight bow, her voice barely more than breath. We remember, too. Outside the museum, Jupiter burned on the horizon like an eternal sentinel, and across the stars, new signals echoed in silence. Some from old friends, some from unknown voices still waiting to be heard. But this time, humanity would listen. This time, they would not wait until the last breath to reach out. Because in saving the Zahari, they had uncovered something long buried beneath data and doctrine. They had remembered what it meant to be more than survivors. They had remembered what it meant to choose compassion, not as strategy, not as debt, but as legacy. And in the cold, vast dark of the universe, that light, however faint, was enough to keep going. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.